So today we're also going to try to kind of combine some of the things that we've learned before. And we're going to try to combine user input as well as file input and or output, or actually both. And we'll also combine that and do a little bit of loops again and stuff, the kind of standard things. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to write a program that has a participant list. And it's going to ask for user input continuously until our participant list is full, or until enough people have registered, or until it's kind of booked out. And it's going to take all this data and it's going to write it to a file. And then later on, we're going to read this data out from the file, and we'll look at it a little bit and maybe do some simple statistics or something just to kind of get a feel of the data and maybe do a little bit of manipulation with that. But first let's focus on actually getting this participation list. And so to start off, let's just define a variable called participant. Oh, so we're still in the comments here. I actually need to close the comments from up here. And we'll make a variable called participant number. And this is going to be the amount, or the number of participants that are going to be allowed to register. So let's just start off with 5 participants right now, like such. So our participant number is 5. So that means we'll just allow 5 participants to register. And now we have to store the participant data somewhere. So let's just make a new variable called participant data. And we'll just keep it as an empty list right now because we actually do want to store it in order and everything. And we don't want to get the participant data mixed up. We want them all to be grouped nicely. So orderly, like in participant number, but we also want all the participant data to be in one kind of grouping so that each participant has their appropriate data. So what we're going to do is actually we're going to have a list of participant data, and each element in this list is itself going to be a smaller list that contains the participant data. So for example, the first element in participant data would be the first participant, and it would contain all of their appropriate data. And then the second element in participant data would be the second participant. And that list, or that small list that would be the second participant, would contain all the data of the second participant. So yeah, let's just start off. And let's just start off with the input, and then we'll go at it step by step. So yeah, let's make a while loop maybe. And we'll start with first let's make a value called registered participants, and we'll use this as kind of a counter. So registered participants will have v equal to 0, and this we'll use in our while loop. And so to create the while loop, we'll type in the keyword while, and we'll open and close the parentheses. And what we want to do is while our registered participants are less than the participant number, we want to be able to allow registration. So while registered participants is less than the participant number. Now you may notice my variable names are kind of long, which is a little bit inconvenient rather than just writing reg part and 5 or something. But this is just kind of for completeness, just so that we see really what's going on, we have an overview, and we can kind of follow what the variables are called. So this is good practice for good variable naming, even though the variable names themselves are kind of long and maybe a little bit cumbersome to deal with. But yeah, so we'll finish our while loop, and we'll have our colon here to indicate that we want to start it. So this is our while loop kind of definition. And so, well, what do we want to do? Well, we want to first ask the user for a set of participant data. So we have to think about what do we want to know from them, what information do they have to put in when they register. And so maybe let's just go with the name, let's go with the country of origin, and let's go with the age. And we want to store all this data in kind of a temporary place. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create the variable that's going to store all our data before we can actually ask for input. So we'll start off and we'll make a variable called temp part data. And so this is going to be short for temporary participant data. So we don't really want to write out that whole word because that's pretty long. So we'll just kind of shorthand it, and we'll write temp part data for temporary participant data. That's just our variable name, just for convenience. And we'll have it be equal to an empty list. And so this is the list that we're going to put the individual participant data inside. So it's going to have kind of the name as the first element, then it's going to have the country of origin as the second element, and then it's going to have the age as the third element. And so this will kind of overwrite every loop, but we will add it to the participant data in the end. So yeah, so this is just our kind of temporary data holder. So yeah, let's start off, and the first thing that we want to do is we want to ask for the name. So let's save the name in the variable called name. And so we'll have name, and here we're going to ask for user input. We'll just ask them to input their name. So we write name is equal to, and this allows us to save the input inside a variable. And then we'll just write input. And so here we get the input keyword, which indicates that we're going to ask for user input. We'll open and close parentheses, and inside we'll open and close the quotation marks and give some directions to the user so that they actually know what we want. So let's put inside, please enter your name. Please enter your name. So we're just telling the user we want them to input their name. And then we'll do a colon and some space just for formatting so that they don't start typing at the end of the E here and it all looks kind of weird. We don't need to cast it as anything because we want to keep it as a word anyway, so we don't need to put anything in front of here. So we can just leave it as this. Now we want to add this to our temporary data. So what we want to do is we want to take our name and we want to put it inside of this list. So the best way to go about that would probably just be to take the temporary participant data, or the temp par data variable that has our list, and to it we just want to append. So we take our temp part data and then we do the dot, which indicates that we want to do something to it. And what we want to do is we want to append. So we write append, and we open and close the parentheses, and what we want to append to it is the name. So what this is going to do is it's going to take the temporary participant data list, and to the end of it, it's going to add the name. Since there's nothing inside it, our first element is just going to be the name. And so the next thing that we want to ask for is the country of origin. So we'll just create a variable for that too. We'll call it country. And here we'll do the same thing as above. We'll just ask for user input. So we'll say to save the user input. That's why we have this kind of country equals. So we're going to ask for the user input and we'll save it in country. And here we'll use the input keyword to prompt the user for input. And we open and close parentheses to kind of complete this prompt. And technically it would work by itself here, but we want to just give the user some direction. So we'll open and close quotation marks, and inside we'll write, please enter your country of origin. And then we'll add a colon and a space again just for some formatting. Yeah, so we're doing pretty much the same thing as above. Above here we asked for the name. Please enter your name. Down here we've asked for the country. So please enter your country of origin. We're saving the country in a variable called country. We're saving the name in a variable called name. Technically we could also reuse the same variable. So we could make a general variable called x, for example, and we could save the name input in x and then add it and the country input in the same variable and just continue overwriting it. But we'll just leave it like this just to have the code be a little more clear so that we can actually see what's going on and have some neat code that can easily be understood afterwards. So yeah, we don't have to do anything to the input here either because we take it in as a word and we want to keep it as a word, or we want to keep it as a string. Yeah, so we won't do anything here either. So we'll just keep this here as the country, and we want to add that to the end of our temporary participant data. So we'll take our temp part data variable, which stores our temporary participant data. So it started off as empty, then we added name to the end of it, and now we want to append. So we do dot append. The dot is the dot kind of indicates that we want to do something to this temporary participant data, or this temp part data variable. And what we want to do is we want to append. And we want to append to the end of it the country. So now our temp part data has the name as the first variable because we added that to the end of an empty list, and it has the country as a second variable, or as a second element. So its name is the first element, country is the second element. And now we just want to ask for the age. So we'll create another variable that's going to save the age, and the age is going to be equal to, and then we ask for input, and you open and close the parentheses, and then open and close the quotation marks, and then we write here, please enter your age, and then colon and a space, just for formatting again. And now the age is actually going to be an integer, so we'll want to kind of convert it to that. So if we just get this input, we usually get a string or a word, so something that has quotation marks around it, which generally isn't a problem. But so like, for example, here, it's not a problem generally for country, and it's not a problem for name. But if we want to have age, we want it to be an integer, so we have to put int around it. So this will, what this int does is that everything inside, if possible, will be converted to an integer. So what we would get from this input, for example, if the age is 25, if they input 25, what we would get is 25 like that. And what happens if we put int around this is that it will try to convert it to an integer. So int of the word 25, or of the string 25, so we see the quotation marks here, will actually go to the number 25. And so our age is going to save the number 25 rather than the word 25. Subtle difference, but it really is a difference. Yeah, so that's, maybe we can just leave that there too. Yeah, so that's what we're doing here. I mean, we've seen this before, but it's always nice to recap. And now we also just want to add this to the end of our temporary data. So we'll take our temp part data, and to it, so we have the dot here, to it we want to append, the age, just like such. And so now our temp part data looks like this. So we've got name as the first element, country as the second element, and age as the third element. So we've added name to the empty list, which puts it here in first place. We've added country to this list, so country is going to be the second element, and then age is added to the end of name and country. So we've got name, country, age. So append always adds to the end. And so this is what our temp part data looks like at the end of this. And now all that we need to do is we need to save our temporary data inside of our participant data. So what we want to do is we want to take our participant data, so our variable that we defined up here, and to it we want to append, and we want to append all the data. So we want to append this whole list. So we actually want to append the whole temp part data. So we want to append the whole thing to it. Yeah, and so the way that would look like now, so the participant data would now look like temp part data. So this is how the participant data looks like after the first run through. And if we actually put in the temp part data, which is what we have here, so what it actually looks like is like this. So this is what our participant data looks like. We can just put this on a new line. We've got, let's just break this up a little bit here. So we've got our participant data, which looks like this, which has a list that contains the temp part data because we appended that to it. And the temp part data actually looks like this. It's a list in it by itself, and it contains the name, country, and age. So this is all one element. This is the first element, but it itself is a list. So we've seen this before, but we'll just kind of see it over and over again to have it be a little bit more common, a little bit more, sensical. Yeah, so that we just kind of get used to putting all sorts of things inside lists. And so this is really advantageous for us because this one element here inside of the participant data is just one participant, and it itself stores a lot of information about the participant. So we know that each element in the participant data is a participant, and each participant itself has a name, country, and age data. So that makes it very easy for us to access this data. It makes it very logical. And so, yeah, so what is the last thing that we want to do, or what is the last thing that we need to do? Since we're inside of a while loop, and we don't want to keep this infinite, and since a participant is now registered, we want to increase the registered participants number. So we want to go registered participants. And now, since someone is registered, we have to increase the number of registered participants. So we can do the short form and just do plus equals 1. So this just kind of increments the registered participants by 1. It's the same as writing registered participants, so it would be the same as if we write this. If we write equals to registered participants plus 1. So this and this is the same, and this is just short form, and since registered participants is a really long variable name, it's much easier to just write it like this. So yeah, I mean, we'll leave this here too, just so that you can kind of remember if you forget or something, but it's just nice to learn these short forms since we want to just write as little as possible, but we want it to work just as well. Yeah, so we've got our registered participants here. And now we're not saving it in a file yet. We can do that in a second, and we can actually look at 2 ways to do that. But first, let's just run our code, and let's make sure it works. And maybe let's just put this number down to 2 right now so that we only have to put in 2 participants rather than 5. So let's just run this, and now please enter your name. We'll enter here, we'll enter maybe Max. Country of origin, we'll put in the US, and then the age, we'll put in 21. And now the second participant, we can put in maybe Bob. Country of origin can be Canada, and the age can be 25. And so we see that after 2 runs through, so after 2 participants, our loop stops. We just kept it as 2 because we don't want to continuously just enter data. Now we don't really see our data being stored, so if we want, we can print it out. Maybe that would be a nice thing to do. So we can just run this one more time and actually print out maybe our temp part data, and also print out our participant data, just so that we write that small participant data, just to really see that our code is really doing what we want it to do. So let's run that one at a time. Let's put in Max here, and then the US for the country. Oh, well, should be capital, but whatever. 21. So here we see our temp part data, which is Max, US, and 21. And we see here that this is an integer because it doesn't have the quotation marks around it. And here we see our participant data. So it's a list, and in itself is the list that we have up here. And so now we can do again, Bob, Canada, and 25. And so now we see our temp part data has been overwritten. And so that's because at the beginning of the loop, we always make it an empty list. And so that means every time we finish a loop, we overwrite our temp part data and it goes back to being empty. So that's why we don't keep the data from before, but we just start off with an empty list every time and we've overwritten it. And we see though that our participant data contains both the first participant as the first element. And so we've got the comma here, and this separates the elements. So this is all our first element, and the second element, which is the second participant. Cool. So we've got 2 participants. Each of these participants has data of themselves. So great, this is exactly what we want. So yeah, we can say that it works. So now what do we want to do? Well, we want to write this all to a file. And now there are different ways that we can go about this. We can either write this to a file every time we get input. So like every participant, we can immediately write to a file, or we can write it to a file all in the very end. Let's just go with the later. Let's just write everything to a file all in the very end. but I can kind of tell you while we're going through how you would do it the other way. But it doesn't really matter that much. So you can choose which way you want to do. It may be a little bit nicer just to kind of, once you have a complete participant list, to write it to a file, because it's a little bit more, I guess it makes a little bit more sense once you've got a complete list. Then you kind of write it all down rather than while everything is being created, but it's really up to you. So we'll create a new variable here and we'll call it the output file, or yeah, we'll call it the output file. So this is what we're going to write to. And so our output file is going to be equal to, and now to write to files, remember, we have to open a file. So we use the keyword open, and then we open and close parentheses, and then we open and close quotation marks, and inside of here, we want to put in the file name. So we're going to put in participant data. Yeah, and maybe we can just make it a .txt, and then we put in a comma, and then here we're going to put quotation marks open and close again, and now we indicate what we want to do. We want to write it. And now I don't actually have the participant data.txt file on my computer, but if I don't have it here and I use the write keyword, or the W, which stands for write, then it would automatically be created. And remember, you have to be careful. If you use the W, then it will overwrite the file if it already exists. If it doesn't exist, it will create it. Yeah, so this is our output file, and so this is what we're going to write to. Now, before we do anything else and maybe forget later, let's make sure we close the file at the very end. So we'll do our output file and then .close. So this is just to make sure that our file closes correctly and there's no errors with anything with the file writing or such, that everything is done correctly. And so we'll just leave this here at the very bottom, and we'll continue to write code above it, but just so that we don't forget later. So we'll leave that here. And now what we want to do is we just want to go and we want to write to this file. So a nice way to do this, if we just loop through our participant data. So we're going to make a for loop or a for in. So we'll start off with the for keyword, and then we'll use our temporary variable, and let's call it a participant, because that's really what it is. So so this is going to be our temporary variable that takes on each of the participant data elements one by one. So we have our participant here. So for participant in, and now we want to go through the registered participants, and then the colon to indicate that we want to start the loop. So what are we doing? We're using a for in loop, and we're going to go through the registered participants element by element, and each element is going to be temporarily stored in the participants, and each element is what we see here is a list in it by itself here, like this and like this. So this is one element, this here is another element. So that's what our participants are going to look like. Now, since we have lists there, we also need to probably just loop through these element by element. So we can do another for in loop, and we can do for, and then this is going to be our data, so we'll call it temporary variable data. For data in participant, we'll do the following, so colon. So what are we doing here? Well, our registered participants, for example here, would look like this. So we would have the first participant here being the first element, the second participant being the second element. And so our participant would first take on the value of the first participant like this. And then our data is going to loop through this. So it would first take on max, then US, and then 21. And then our participant is going to take on the value of the second participant. And then our data is going to loop through that. And the data is going to take on the value Bob, Canada, and 25. And so that's how that's going to work. And so we remember that if we have a for loop here, it will always just every time this loop is completed, this for loop will get called. So this loop is going to get called every time we have a new participant. Okay, so what do we want to do to this data? Well, this data we actually want to write to the file. So we're going to take our output file and we're going to do something to it. And what are we going to do? We're going to write to it. So we'll do the dot to indicate that we want to do something to it, and then we'll use the write keyword to indicate that we want to write to it. And inside of here, we want to put in what we want to write. So we want to write in the data. And so this is just going to write our data in. Now there are some things that we need to pay attention to. One of the things is that we can only write strings to files. So we can only write words, so anything in quotation marks. And that's not a problem until we reach 21. And once we reach 21, that's going to be a problem because 21 is an integer or a whole number. And we can only write strings. So just to be safe, we'll put the str keyword around data, like so. So we open and close parentheses around data and have the str. And so what this would do is this, and this is very similar to this int above here, but let's just walk through it first. What this does, so what str does to the integer 25 is it turns it into the word 25 or the string 25. So what we had up here is the int around something. So the int around a word tries to convert the word to an integer, like we did up here. And now the str around a number or around anything else tries to convert this to a word. So str of a number, so string of a number, for example, would be the number with quotation marks around it, but it would be the word 25 rather than the integer 25. And now we're not going to have a problem, and we can write to the file. Now, something else that we need to keep in mind is that when we write to the file like this, different than when we print something. So when we print something, we see here that it automatically goes to new lines and there's new formatting. But when we write, that's not going to be the case. So if we, for example, take our first participant and we go through it, then what our file would actually look like, so for data and participants, and if our first participant is this, and so data would take on max first, what our file would actually look like would be max, and that's because that's what it's going to write, and then data is going to take on US, and then it's going to write US like this, and then it's going to take on 21, and then we're going to write the word 21. So this is what our file would look like, and there isn't any actual formatting done there, because that would be pretty terrible if it just added extra formatting. So we need to do that manually. We need to add, if we want, but we definitely want that, we need to add extra formatting. And so what we want to do first of all is after every time we wrote a word to it, we want to just add a space. So to the output file, what we want to do is we want to do something to it. We want to write and open and close parentheses. And what we want to do to it is we want to write a space. So we'll just open quotation marks, put a space, and then close up quotation marks. And so what that's going to do is it's going to add a space here, since this is our first element and our first participant. And it's going to add a space here. And, well, it's actually also going to add a space here. And then what we want to do at the very end is we want to separate our participants by line. So we want our first participant, for example, to be this. And then on a new line, we, for example, want our second participant. So just to kind of draw it out, here we would want, let's see, yeah, this is good formatting. So here we would want to have Bob space Canada because of this space here, space 25 space. So we want these to be on two different lines. So how would we do that? Well, we would, at the end of our for loop, since we want to end this after all the data has been written, once our for loop inside here is complete, so once we've written all the data separated by spaces, we want to write a new line to the file. So we'll go output, file, and what we want to do to it is we want to dot write, open and close parentheses, and what we want to write to it is open and close quotation marks, a new line. So that's the backslash, which indicates that the next character is going to have a special function, n. So we remember that the backslash n is a special character that puts in a new line rather than putting in an n or anything. So the backslash n has a special function, which is writing a new line. Yeah, so this is what we're doing. We're just looping through this. We're writing all our data separated by spaces on one line for one participant. And once we finish the participant, so we'll see here that this indentation is the same. That means we're no longer inside of this for loop here because we're not indented inside. So once this for loop here is complete, then we go out of the loop and then we write this line, or then we execute this line, and this line is going to add a new line after it's written everything on one line. So then we jump to the new line in the file. And then we go through all the participants like that, and then we close our file at the very end. So that's also important. So let's just run it once. Yeah. And so we'll just use the same things we used before. Max US like this, 21. And so here we get the printing from the temp part data in our participant data. So this is the temporary data. This is our participant data that we're going to write later. And here we'll write Bob in Canada and 25. Oh, so we've gotten an error. What did we get an error about? We got an error about for participant and registered participants. So an int object is not. So we used the wrong variable name here. So we wanted to loop through a number registered participant. What we actually want to loop through is the participant data. Participant data. So what I tried to do is I tried to loop through the number of registered participants, which is just going to be 2. That doesn't really tell us much. We actually want to loop through the actual participant data, which we had up here. So that's what we want to loop through. So yeah, let's run this again, and now it should work. So we'll put in max and US here and 21. And so this is the data that we're going to write later. And then Bob. And here we'll have our Canada and 25. And now it works, so we don't get the error anymore. So the problem was that here I had the registered participants, which is a number. And so we can't do a for in loop in a number because there are no elements to go through in a number. But here we actually have a list of the participant data, which is what we actually want. And so here we can go through element by element. Yeah, so now we've written it to a file. And now the next thing that we're going to look at is reading everything from this file and using that nicely and effectively, just kind of seeing the data.